folk of Alexander, and some of Hercules, of Hector and Lysander, and such great names as these. But of all...
Hello and welcome to this Battletech review. Today we're going to talk about the Wyvern, and not the cool mythological creature we've got on the left here, but the rather undeservedly, I'd say maybe, unknown Battletech on the right. One of the first great example of a city fighter. I was planning on doing something a bit different with the DCMS light mech lineup, but the Wyvern came up in conversation yesterday as one was driven in the factory for a refit at the same time as we got a bunch of Liao plasma rifles. We'll talk about that later. I think it's one of those mechs that didn't get as much love as other from that same SLDF era, and one that we do need to look at a little bit. Battletech started production of the Wyvern in 2660 at their facility on Urbie as a side project to their extremely lucrative Tug line of assault mech. The Tug's another one of those mechs that you don't see a whole lot nowadays, but that's because most people using a mech with that equipment lineup now use the Hatamoto Chi, which was produced in a far bigger number from the 3050s onward. City fighting is never something that's really well regarded, and I don't think it ever will be. But there are always requirements for machines to be able to do that, and the SLDF had requirements for this. And that was 15 years before Orgus put their thinking caps on and made the walking trash can, which is the Urbanmech. As with most urban fighting machines, the Wyvern fits a role as close quarter combat and restricted mobility combat, canyons, deep forests, delta rivers, anything where you jumping will give you a big advantage. The Wyvern is going to be pretty good at, and it's going to be superior to most regular armor vehicles and any battle mech with no jump jets. But there are things also in urban combat that you have to be careful of. We'll talk about that maybe in a little bit here. So as I was saying, really, you need to be able to jump in order to be an efficient city fighter in terms of being a battle mech, but it also requires your construction to be fairly tough because you're going to be jumping a lot, of course, so everything needs to be shock absorbent, and you're gonna bump into things. Buildings, cars, trucks, construction mechs, a whole lot of things. And the Wyvern was actually built to be fairly rugged and fairly tough in terms of, well, the armor on it. We're looking at 9.5 tons of regular armor, but even the skeleton made of endo steel, the original one, was built with all sorts of shock absorbents and resistant material, so you didn't have to bring it in for maintenance and rework all that often. Still, it's a 45-ton mech, so you would think it would go faster, but the Wyvern 5N, pretty much every Wyvern, to my knowledge, uses the GM180 power plant. Very common, very efficient power plant, which gives it a top speed of 65 kilometers per hour with a jump range of 120 meters. It's good enough if you're doing city fighting, but if you're going to go in an open field or anything a little bit less restrictive, you're probably going to get outrun by other mediums, and you might get caught in the open where you don't want to be. As far as protection as well, you do have all your ammo stored in case, so it won't blow up too terribly if bad things happen. And you've got 12 standard heat sinks to keep it warm enough, let's say. As far as combat performance, the Wyvern's meant to be able to engage targets at all range. It could probably do it a little bit better, and there's things that we need to look at here. The main weapons are a 10-rack LRM in the center torso, which is a terrible position for it because the ammo feed goes right next to the fusion engine, which is not the smartest thing ever. And a arm-mounted Nightwing large laser, which is probably one of the most reliable and oldest large laser in production. Not as popular as some of the others we've seen around nowadays, but at Time of release, this was a well-known piece of equipment. There's also a 6-tube of SRM, meant to it weaken armor, disable vehicles, all sorts of fun things you do with SRMs, basically. You could technically load them with Inferno rounds to make things extra crispy. Not an horrible idea, I guess. The large laser is also coupled with a pair of Starflash small lasers, which actually feed off the same energy core, just because of how efficient the Nightwind actually is. Where I think there's a bit of an issue is because the Wyvern doesn't have any real anti-infantry weapons in its loadout. The best thing you can really do, like I said, is load the SRMs with Inferno and hope the infantry runs for the hill. Infantry in city fights are actually a far bigger issue nowadays and during the Succession War than they would have been during the SLDF era. In the SLDF era, you showed up with Wyverns and stuff in a city to do a city fight. It was probably to take out a bunch of Ronin or a bunch of very nasty pirates in armored equipment. Insurrections did happen, but that was actually more a thing that was going to be taken care of by minor houses and what would become the successor houses. In the actual SLDF, it wasn't as big of a threat. I would still probably have gone with a 4-tube SRM, a pair of machine guns, and ammo for that machine gun, something along those lines rather than the small lasers, just to be able to deal with infantry better. As the Wyvern was a Terran hegemony mech, and a specialized one at that, the SLDF regiments and the Royal regiments wanted their own version of the Wyvern and requested them in fairly large numbers. There were actually 2 different versions of the Royal Wyvern that were produced. The standard one, the 5NB, uses an XL engine on that GM180. That saves you a little bit of space, I guess. And you replace the large laser with a large pulse laser and one of the small laser with a medium laser. So you do have a little bit more varied punch here with a bit more varied range, and you get an extra heat sink to try to keep that cool. Not a bad setup. The 5NSL, on my opinion, though, is the better one of the 2. It uses double heat sinks, but only 10 of them. Still going to run fairly hot because the large laser is replaced with an ER large laser. And the 6-tube SRM is actually replaced with a trio of 2-tube Streak SRMs. Why is that a good thing? Well, in city fights, when you're shooting missiles, missiles have a tendency to go all over the place and cause all sorts of damage. If it's not your own city, it's not as bad. I mean, in the end, you're not going to be the one paying for the repair. But if it's your own city, like the SLDF was generally going to be fighting in, well, you don't want missiles to go all over the place and damage things that you're going to have to end up paying for. Streak SRM solved that problem by only shooting when the lock-on is complete and you know it's going to hit. This is a fair trade, in my opinion. Battletech's main factory wasn't destroyed until 2835 due to an odd incident where we don't have all the details, but there were still a bunch of Wyverns running around, and they were running a downgrade kit basically for it up until that point, and they probably were still building replacement parts and probably a lot of other stuff for it, all the way to a complete extinction basically. Without Endosteel or the case, the WVE 6N keeps the same weapon loadout. There's no changes there. I was expecting something like small lasers being removed, but no. What they've done is remove 1 ton of armor, which ends up covering here with the 2 cases being removed in each of the torsos for the difference in weight in the Endosteel. 1.5 ton of standard compound on a 45-ton mech is still more than enough, especially if it's a urban fighter. As far as the transition goes, it worked really well, and I don't think anybody had many issues with them. It just wasn't a thing that was in high demand or in high priority. Everybody had a few of them running around, but nobody had entire units of them or specialized units with Wyverns in them. As with most SLDF mechs, the Wyvern was in possession of Comstar for their Comguard, so in the end they built 2 new versions for the upcoming age. The WVE9N was a Battle of 2K exclusive. Probably need to get it in one of those special scratch packs or something, loot boxes. And it comes with a large pulse laser, 2 medium pulse laser, less armor, and a single streak SRM2. It's better at a mid-range punch. It's pretty good at hitting things that are moving quickly, which is what you're going to be dealing with when you're fighting the clan. So very decent setup for that battle mech, but it never really caught on. The WVE-10N is now built by Battletech when they reopened their line, and was built as a mobile sniper with an ERPPC, a medium pulse laser, and a 10-rack LRM. No longer have an SRM or the spare laser. As with most Comstar gear from the era just before the Jihad, this one features a C3I computer, which is pretty useful if you've got other C3I enhanced machines, and a Guardian ECM to mess with other people's electronics. After this, there were no new versions of the Wyvern released. I'm not even sure if Battletech still is in the production and in the game of Wyverns. I haven't heard about them. I haven't seen them in the field in any special means with any special types of equipment. I will have to admit that the 10N is probably the latest production model and that we might still see some of the older models running around, but that's about it. There are, of course, a few odd wyverns out there coming from Clan Space. Clan Burrock had a Brian cache filled with them apparently, and they turned the place into a factory to refit and probably rebuild a bunch of them, leading to the Wyvern 2C. Outside of modernizing the chassis with a Clan Endosteel rather than Inner Sphere Endosteel, so a lot less bulky, and using a double heatsink kit, it's about the only real modernization on the model itself. The engine's the same, the body kit is roughly the same, actuators and everything are in the same family. Weapon-wise, it follows the same concepts, but iterates on them. You still have the large laser mounted on the arm, along with 10-tube SRM, 6-tube SRM, which are both a lot lighter since they're built to clan standard. On top of that, you got a pair of ER medium lasers and a pair of ER small lasers. So you've got more bang for your buck and more all-range control. But also, for extra police action, you get an extra flamer and a pair of machine guns. This is truly built as a city fighter and a insurgent removal tool, and I think it's probably the final evolution of the Wyvern, and probably something that would end up being copied by Inner Sphere powers if available. Of course, the Wyvern is a great city fighter in its original role, as you have to fight other armored targets in the city. But for more modern situations, it's not as great because you're not going to have as many armored targets in a lot of cities where you're going to go in. I never had to play with a lot of wyverns back in the days. They're extremely rare, especially around here in the end. But we did have to refit one to be rather specialized, and we just got a new one with that shipment of plasma rifles that wants the same thing to be done. We basically turned the thing into a police brutality machine. I don't know if there's a better term for it, unfortunately. But we mounted a single MML9 instead of the SRM6, taking out the LRM10. We're reducing the number of missiles to have variety. You still have a ton of each type of ammo, and the biggest advantage is that your ammo feed doesn't go through the engine anymore, so you're saving yourself on that. The arm weapon assembly is modified as well. We did put a plasma rifle in and replaced the small lasers with a pair of flamers. It's not meant to be pretty. It's not meant to be nice. It's supposed to do what it does, and it does it really, really well. We're not the ones who were using it. We sold it to another nation. What they do with it is what they decide to do with it at that point. Final thought, well, I want to remind everybody that urban warfare is a damn dirty thing. You don't want to get into urban warfare if you don't have to. People keep making jokes about the Urbanmech and how it's the greatest mech ever, but even in the end, if you start looking at other urban fighters like the Wyvern, the Victor, the Panther, there's quite a few things that are actually a lot better than a darn Urbanmech. I would personally buy a Wyvern before I buy 2 Urbanmechs. The problem is it's so damn hard to find a Wyvern that it'll make things more difficult for you. One of the reasons why I would get a Wyvern before Urbanmechs is not the one you might expect. The Wyvern actually has hands and full actuators in the arms, so when you're done fighting in the city, you can actually use the Wyvern to help rebuild it, which our Urbanmech is not able to do. So I thank you very much for listening to me for so long. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day, and have fun. Bye-bye.